to order. A quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I also have a few charts and graphs I'd like to display. They have been distributed to members and our witnesses, but I ask unanimous consent to display those on the virtual platform. Before we proceed, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items for our remote hearing. First, if you are experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so those issues can be resolved immediately. Members participating remotely must continue to use the video function for the duration of their participation in the hearing unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. It is committee and subcommittee policy that members will remain muted when not recognized, just like turning your microphone on and off during an in-person hearing. This is out of courtesy to all members on the subcommittee, and so that background noise does not interfere with another member who is recognized to speak. When you are recognized, you will need to unmute your microphone and pause for a couple of seconds before speaking so that we will be able to hear everything you say. In order to ensure everything members say is captured on the live stream of this hearing, I ask that members pause for 2 to 3 seconds before beginning to speak. If you wish to have a document inserted into the record, please ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email the document to veteranaffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. It will be uploaded to the committee document repository. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of the subcommittee seniority for questioning witnesses today. This will make it easier for me to ensure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. Does any member have a question about the procedures for this hearing? Hearing none, we shall proceed. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Today, the subcommittee will be reviewing the Department of Veteran Affairs fiscal year 2022 information technology budget request. Following a very productive full committee hearing, I feel that it is important for this subcommittee to take a deeper dive on IT spending. If we could show slide 1, please. Take a look at the chart. According to the Office of Management and Budget, VA spends more on IT than any federal agency other than the Department of Defense. I want to ensure that VA has proper management and acquisition controls to ensure they are making the most of their investment. If you could close slide 1. For fiscal year 2022, VA requested a 10% overall increase in funding from fiscal year 21, enacted levels, and a 9% increase in discretionary funding. Despite these large increases, funding for information technology decreased. VA plans to supplement this request with funds from the Recurring Expenses Transformational Fund. I am concerned that modernization of IT assets and the critical upgrade of VA's financial system are not included in the base budget request. The Transformational Fund is an excellent supplement, but funding levels fluctuate on a yearly basis. As the Government Accountability Office will testify, VA has struggled to successfully manage IT programs. In 2015, VA's management of IT acquisitions and operations were added to their high-risk series and remain there. The department is now going through its third effort to modernize VA's financial management system, which is a 35-year-old unsupported legacy system. The electronic health record modernization program has been preceded by 3 unsuccessful modernization attempts over the past 20 years. I am very concerned about the management and the budgeting for these programs. VA is reliant on IT to serve and care for veterans, and it is my goal to ensure the mistakes of the past are not repeated. In May, the subcommittee held a hearing to examine VA's cybersecurity efforts. For good reason. The subcommittee is concerned about VA's ability to protect the information of veterans, as well as its ability to ensure there are no disruptions in service. Please show slide 2. Take a look at the data compiled by the Congressional Research Service. Among 19 major agencies and departments, VA ranks 5th lowest in the cybersecurity funding. This is despite spending more on IT than any department other than the DoD. Please close slide 2. At the full committee hearing with the Secretary, I discussed my concerns with the lack of discretionary spending on cybersecurity. I intend to continue pursuing this issue. I look forward to hearing from our VA witnesses about the department's IT funding priorities. I'm interested in hearing whether this budget request will be sufficient to continue modernizing aging IT systems and funding cybersecurity requirements. We will also hear from the GAO, who has performed substantive work with the VA on IT, cyber, and acquisition management. I thank the witnesses for being here, and I look forward to their testimony. I would now like to recognize my colleague, Ranking Member Mr. Rosendale, to deliver any opening remarks he may have. Mr. Rosendale?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Audio okay? Okay. Information technology is integral to the success of any organization. That's especially true of the Department of Veterans Affairs, which has a sacred mission of caring for the men and women who defend our country. VA is in the midst of the biggest technology modernization drive in its history. I understand the importance of identifying IT needs and funding them. But in the 100 pages of the budget request, the VA Office of Information and Technology does not satisfactorily answer some of the most basic questions. How do we measure progress toward our objectives? How well are we achieving them with the resources provided? And how many resources would be needed to fully achieve them? OIT's budget tells me it costs about $4.8 billion to keep the lights on. That's not good enough. We need the facts and the data. First of all, it's a huge amount of money. It's nearly the annualized budget of the state of Montana. I expect stewardship of every single dollar. Only in the VA does the OIT budget seem small by comparison. It was $3.3 billion in 2010, and it's increased by 3.8% annually on average over the past decade. Whereas the Veterans Health Administration budget was about $48 billion in 2010 and is now requesting more than $100 billion. That is about a 6.5% annual growth rate. VA is continually growing and creating new IT requirements faster than it can manage them. What concerns me even more is the recent boom and bust. OIT's annual funding has fluctuated up and down modestly over the last decade. However, the CARES Act increased the organization's budget by $2.15 billion over 2 years, which is equivalent to nearly half of the base budget. Responsibly spending a windfall that large is extremely difficult. The CARES Act was basically a sugar high, and the sugar high is ending. OIT requested $1.7 billion in the American Rescue Plan, but in a series of events that still have not been fully explained, it received $100 million for a supply chain system. Basing the budget on either having a feast or famine is no way to take care of our veterans. Next year, it just so happens that the Transformation Fund is coming online. This is an authority Congress created in 2015, allowing the VA to spend expiring dollars after 5 years on IT and other facilities. OIT is getting a $670 million infusion from that fund. I have no doubt that without the Transformation Fund, the end of the CARES Act sugar high and the inability to secure ARP dollars would be damaging and disorderly. What is just as troubling and confounding to me is how these funds come as unspent on the delivery of healthcare, an area we know has been deficient in its delivery of services to our veterans. As a Congress, we need to stop the supplemental appropriations that may be well-intentioned, but they often create uncertainty and waste. We should concentrate on a regular budget process. I consider it this subcommittee's oversight responsibility to make sure that the Transformation Fund dollars go toward actual needs that improve VA's efficiency and effectiveness. For example, that these funds go towards modernizing networks, not just expanding outdated architecture, that we buy new laptops for employees who actually need them, and the computers do not sit in unused in boxes in warehouses, and that we retain good employees, not hire them just to lay them off a year later. Unfortunately, based on OIT's budget request, I cannot say any of those things with certainty. I see that $477 million is being directed to an infrastructure readiness program. There are about 5 pages of general discussion about the types of things this money may buy, but there is little to no detail about what equipment is being bought, how much is being bought, where it will be used, and for what specific purpose it's needed. Additionally, nearly $70 million is being directed to a new human resource system that we have practically no information about, and around $123 million of costs for the financial management business transformation program are being shifted off budget. I need a lot more information about the transformation fund to be convinced it will be a reliable, productive funding source rather than an opaque, uncertain slush fund. These are just a few examples of how the VA budget leaves me with more questions than answers. This is the most in-depth document the department produces all year. It should be clarifying, but in far too many respects, it seems like a box checking exercise. I want to explore how we can improve the budgeting process. I appreciate our witnesses participating today to help us better understand these issues. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. I will now introduce the witnesses we have before the subcommittee today. Mr. John Rachalski is the Assistant Secretary and Chief Financial Officer of the Department of Veteran Affairs. Mr. Rachalski is accompanied by Mr. Dominic Cassatt, Acting Assistant Secretary of Information Technology and Acting Chief Information Officer. Mr. Michael Parrish, Executive Director for Acquisitions, Logistics and Construction and Chief Acquisition Officer, and Mr. Larry Davis, Executive Director for IT, Budget and Finance, and Ms. Carol Harris, Director of Information Technology and Cybersecurity, U.S. Government Accountability Office. We will now hear the prepared statements from our panel members. I will remind you to please pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that the recording will capture all of your words. And please remember to do so when answering members' questions. Thank you. Your written statements in full will be included in the hearing record without objection. Mr. Rachalski, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to open by saying that as a native Montanan, the flag in Congressman Rosendale's background gives me a warm, tingly feeling. Chairman Mervan, Ranking Member Rosendale, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of the President's fiscal year 2022 information technology budget request and for your steadfast support of our veterans. I'm accompanied today by Mr. Michael Parrish, Principal Executive Director, Office of Acquisition, Logistics and Construction, and Chief Acquisition Officer for the VA, Mr. Dominic Cassatt, Acting Assistant Secretary for the Office of Information and Technology and Chief Information Officer for the VA, and Mr. Larry Davis, Executive Director for IT, Budget and Finance for the Office of Information Technology. When we prepare our information technology budget, we consider our overall requirements, how many resources we can effectively use in a given year, and sources of available funding. Our goal is to balance healthcare, benefits, and IT resourcing to optimize our impact to the veteran. Fiscal year 22 is unique in that it will be the first time we have access to the Recurring Expenses Transformational Fund authorized by the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2016. It permits VA to transfer unobligated balances of expired discretionary resources into the fund for facility infrastructure improvements as well as information technology sustainment and improvement. We are planning to invest at least $670 million from this fund in IT. However, it is possible we will have additional flexibility in this account to invest even more. Additionally, we are authorized to use American Rescue Plan funds for certain IT requirements, so we have this as an additional source of funds in FY22. We are currently evaluating enduring IT requirements that resulted from the pandemic that make sense to fund using ARP resources. The OIT total budget has increased by 34% or $1.4 billion since 2019 in comparison to the 2022 request, which includes the use of the Transformation Fund. Despite this growth, I must acknowledge that we have a sizable technical debt, especially with respect to our aging IT infrastructure. The primary cause of this deficit is a failure to properly account for the IT costs associated with new initiatives over many years. Rather than include IT as a part of the inherent cost of a new benefit or initiative, other IT accounts were rated to fund the new initiative. Many years ago, additional IT capability for a new initiative may have resulted in only a modest cost. Today, virtually every new initiative or requirement has a substantial IT resource requirement. In fact, for many, it's the single most expensive component of implementation. That is why the Infrastructure Readiness Program, or IRP, is a linchpin in our IT financial program. The ability to upgrade aging infrastructure across the entire VA is the toughest and most budget-intensive task IT undertakes. The IRP guides the ongoing refresh and replacement of the IT infrastructure that sustains all VA IT operations. We would like to thank Congress for the supplemental funding provided in legislation, such as the CARES Act, for enabling IT to respond to the pandemic and to provide uninterrupted service to our nation's veterans. This additional funding has also contributed to infrastructure improvements. The cyber threat environment is becoming more complex daily. IT works to ensure that veterans' data, personal identifiable information, and personal health information are secure. The VA Information Security Budget request for fiscal year 2022 is $360.7 million, a $19 million increase from the FY21 enacted level. Again, VA appreciates Congress support with supplemental funding. During the COVID-19 pandemic, VA OIT rapidly scaled bandwidth and capacity to enable the department's remote workforce. Funding from the CARES Act to sustain this work does not expire until September 2021. OIT is working to convert as many of the temporary new hires as it can into FTE positions to maintain the capabilities required to best serve veterans in a post-pandemic environment where telehealth access is not merely anticipated, but expected. VA is also improving management of IT resources. VA established the IT Investment Board as a further element of agency governance, transparency, and accountability. Through business partnerships forged by this new structure, IT collaborated with our partners during the pandemic to deliver new tools to enhance veterans' experience at the VA, such as the Vet Text solution available in both Spanish and English. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Rosendale, thank you for the opportunity to appear today. I commit to using these resources as responsibly and transparently as possible. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Racholski. At this time, Ms. Harris, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Mervan, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rosendale, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting us to testify today on VA's FY22 IT budget. As requested, I'll briefly summarize our prior work on the department's system modernization efforts over the last decade, as well as its cybersecurity and IT acquisition reform efforts. As you know, the use of IT is crucial to helping VA effectively serve our nation's veterans. Each year, the department spends billions of dollars on its information systems and assets. As you know, VA's IT budget now exceeds $4 billion annually. This morning, I'll highlight 3 key points. First, VA's management of IT system modernization efforts continues to be high risk. VA has faced long-standing challenges in its efforts to deploy modern IT solutions in 2 critical areas: VISTA, its health information system, as well as its financial and acquisition management systems. Specifically, after 3 unsuccessful attempts to modernize VISTA, the department is now undertaking a 4th effort. VA has made progress toward implementing its new electronic health record system by developing system capabilities, conducting end-user training, and completing system testing events. However, we stress that VA needed to address all critical and high-severity test findings that could result in system failure before deploying the system at future locations. Accordingly, we recommended in our February report that the department postpone further deployment until any resulting critical and high-severity test findings are appropriately addressed. Similarly, VA is on its 3rd attempt to replace its aging financial and acquisition management systems with an integrated one. In March, we reported that VA had generally adhered to best practices in the areas of program governance, project management, and testing. However, the department's cost and schedule estimates for the integrated system called IFAMS were unreliable. Accordingly, we recommended VA adhere to best practices for estimating to help minimize the risks of cost overruns and schedule delays. And now to my second point. It is critical that VA's IT budget supports efforts to adequately secure its systems. In several reports issued since 2016, we have highlighted VA's struggles to safeguard its information and systems. For example, in July 2019, we reported that VA had not effectively managed its cyber risks. Given the increasing number and sophistication of cyber threats, it is critical that VA is well positioned to make consistent, informed, risk-based decisions in protecting its systems against these threats. However, VA had not developed a cyber risk management strategy, nor conducted agency-wide cyber risk assessments to manage potential enterprise risks, among other things. In December 2020, we identified issues with VA's ability to identify, assess, and mitigate risks in its IT supply chains. Many of the manufacturing inputs for these products and services originate from a variety of sources throughout the world. As such, it is critical that VA be able to effectively address IT supply chain risks across the department. However, VA had not fully implemented the 7 foundational practices comprising robust IT supply chain risk management. And now to my final point. VA's progress to better manage its IT operations is uneven, and its CIO authorities continue to have key weaknesses. I'm pleased to report that the department has a robust software license management program. As a result, VA is able to analyze agency-wide software license data, such as usage and costs, and have its resulting cost savings. However, the department lacks policies fully addressing the roles and responsibilities of the CIO in 4 of 6 statutory areas, including the IT workforce and IT budgeting. Ensuring that these CIO authorities are formalized is especially critical for the department, as they have had 7 CIOs since 2012, thus making the average CIO tenure at VA less than 2 years. Moving forward in these 3 areas I noted, it will be critical for VA to fully and effectively implement our open recommendations as soon as possible. Doing so will better position the department to more effectively deliver secure systems and IT operations that meet mission needs, and also, where possible, realize additional cost savings. That concludes my statement, and I look forward to addressing your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. At this time, I would recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Cassatt, do you feel the current funding request for programs like FMBT is adequate to ensure timely delivery of the new financial management systems?
Thank you for the question. We do believe the funding we have for this year is adequate to meet our plans for affecting the programs we have planned for the year. We always want to do more, and we always want to, sort of be ahead of things a little more than we are. But we very carefully time phase these things and look at the annual budget and see what we can do each year. So we feel like we're on track with the budget that we have to meet the plans that we have to get the progress we need for this coming year.
Follow-up, is the current funding amount for the Infrastructure Readiness Program enough to begin reducing VA's accumulated technical debt?
I do believe it is enough to begin reducing it. We, for the first time, have a really good picture of what our technical debt is. We do have a detailed plan about regarding how to resolve it within a 4-year time span. And then the important thing is you're never done. You can't just resolve it. You have to refresh, to industry standards, whether it be a 4-year refresh cycle for end user devices or 6 to 7 year refresh cycle for enterprise backbone infrastructure. So we're mindful of that. We feel that the IRP budget, which we have to really be careful to defend. You heard the CFO mention earlier that sometimes those coffers are raided in order to address new requirements for new mission and business efforts. So we plan to very carefully preserve the IRP funds, but it is helping. We are seeing the results of that already. And we do have a plan intact, to sort of get there within the next 2 or 3 years.
The committee was told that the plan for the IRP will not be updated until the end of 2021. If the plan is not finalized, how can you be certain?
The plan is against our best estimates at this point, where we're always re-looking at it and making sure it accounts for any changes in mission or environments. And then also for things like the electronic health record modernization, there were some things we had to either accelerate or change to meet the requirements for the Cerner platform. But we feel it's a good first cut, what we have now, and then we hope to make it an even stronger fact-based estimate by the end of the year.
If I could, given the large increase in overall funding requested for VA this year, when can we expect to see similar increases in requested funding for IT to address VA's technical debt?
I'll start to answer, but I'll defer to our CFO to add on. But each year we are looking at what increased funding we could use to help accelerate addressing technical debt. We want to do it as quickly as possible, but we know funding is limited. So we do make the ask. Like I said, we do understand what we need, and we have a basis of estimate that we can provide to show what's behind that estimate. So we do attempt to increase the funding wherever we can, and like the CFO mentioned earlier, look at other sources of funding, like the transformation fund, and we used some of the CARES Act funding to build out our platforms to support a huge increase in telehealth and remote work. So I'll leave it at that and see if the CFO has anything to add.
I would just add, we want to do it quickly, but we want to do it responsibly. As I described and we've talked about, we do have additional sources of fund in these sort of two anomalous years. The $2.1 billion in CARES Act funding that we're still working our way through. We have access to ARP funds and the transformation fund. And the reality of it is you couldn't dump just 10 or 20 billion in IT and resolve the infrastructure. It's going to take some time to work through it responsibly and effectively. And so I think that we're asking for the right amount of money based upon the need and the other sources of funding we have. Coming out of these 2 years, going into 23, we'll have a better sense of what we need to ask for in the base. And also we'll know what we have in the transformation fund. That'll continue to be a source of funds to us. So.
I thank you. I now recognize Mr. Rosendale. Mr. Rosendale, you're recognized for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Davis, OIT reports on congressional projects in its budget. What is the definition of a congressional project, and why are these projects important but not others? How are they prioritized? One would assume that a congressional project has been authorized by Congress, but most, if not all, of these projects were never authorized.
Thank you, sir. Yes, the way we define the congressional projects and programs, it really based on our investments and how we do our congressional investments. So all the projects on our major investments under those congressional programs and projects sort of line up to that. So it's a roll-up factor. And we've made the decision that those things are going to be reported to Congress so they can actually see our spend and how we've executed those over the time period.
So my understanding is just based on a dollar amount, and the investment is what establishes that it's a congressional project?
It's not really on a dollar amount, sir. It's actually the major investments by the OMB definition. We consider that based on the priority or the sensitivity toward it. It can be $10, but if it's a major critical thing, we're going to report those. It's not really based on the dollars. It's the criticality of the actual program.
So who then establishes that? Is that through OMB, or is that you guys, or in coordination with them?
It's in coordination with OMB.
Okay. Mr. Davis, has OIT ever done a zero-based budgeting process or exercise? In other words, start from blank zero on the page and then build your budget up to based upon what you have identified as your needs, requirements, to deliver your services?
Yes, sir. It's funny you asked that, sir. We actually are trying to do a zero-based budgeting right now. I'm incorporating that. We got a test case going on in DevSecOps right now. We're going to have them build their product lines up from a zero-based budgeting.
And
when background.
And when do you expect that you would have that available for us to look at?
Good question there. We just started the pilot. I would say probably, sir, about it. We're going to try to finish up one of the portfolios in our product line by the end of this summer. And we'd be more than happy, sir, to share those results from that.
Okay, so one portfolio, explain to me, what does that mean from all of OIT then? What are we looking at?
Probably looking at a lot of the software applications. When I say like a portfolio like that, sir, I really meant a product line. So we have different product lines, about 23 right now. We're doing, I think, 5 of those product lines. So that'll be a combination of some congressional projects and programs.
And what amount of your budget is this going to actually describe or address?
I have to get back with you on that one, sir. I'm not sure the exactly dollar amount is that is. We're still
So
going
because obviously if we're doing a zero-based budget, but we're only doing 3% of it, then there's still an awful lot of it that we haven't been able to identify yet. And yet, if you're doing this exercise on something that's going to cover a much larger part of it, then obviously it's more substantive.
Totally agree with you, sir. And what my goal was here to sort of do like a proof of concept, go through the whole process, make sure we have a very good process that we're going to use there. Eventually, we will do the whole budget like that, sir.
Okay. Anything that we can get to help us would be very appreciated. Mr. Cassatt, if I've learned anything from my experience in Congress so far, it's that everybody and their brother always needs more money for everything that's being done. That's why I measure outcomes, not the dollar amounts, the inputs. How are you measuring the outcomes of OIT? What are the metrics that you're using?
Right, that's a great point, and that's very important to us too. So we're in the midst of, the CFO mentioned in his opening testimony that we're in the midst of fully implementing our IT investment board process. And one of the biggest things that we're going to get out of our investment board reviews, which is co-chaired by me, the CFO, and the chief acquisition officer. And the members are all from the undersecretary's offices and all of the administrations and staff offices. So this isn't just an IT thing. This is an IT and mission and business effort. But one of the big things that'll come out of there is return on investment assessments. With that, we're implementing a CPIC process, the capital planning and investment control process, so that we understand what our investments are, what the decisions are in terms of priorities of the mission and business, and then in the end, before we make decisions to reinvest, what was the ROI on that? Another thing that we're doing of interest is fully implementing TBM, technology business management, so that we have a lexicon to identify what the costs are and then roll them back up to the mission and business pillars, so we understand what IT costs we have and how they feed back up into the mission and business. So these tools will help us get there.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I see my time has expired, so I would yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. At this time, I'd like to recognize Mr. Chairman Takano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Mervan. My first question are for Mr. Wachowski. With a 10% increase in funding at VA overall, how do you explain the decrease in funding for information technology?
So it's true that the budget request is a decrease, but when you add in the transformation fund, it's actually a total 12.5% increase. And I know there was some discussion about the use of the transformation fund, but it is for that purpose. It is a source of funds. We felt it was reasonable to use it, included as part of the budget. So the total funding for IT will go up about 12.5% from 21 to 22.
Okay. And do you have a dollar figure on how much you expect to add to IT from the transformational fund?
A minimum of $670 million in 22. And again, the fund is based upon what funds are expiring, and that number tends to go up. And so there may be actually even some additional funding that we'll use from that fund for IT But as of today, I'm very comfortable saying 670 million out of that fund for IT in 22 is a minimum.
Okay, can you tell me for future years how you're going to handle the outline or future years because the transformational fund is an inconsistent funding source, right? So what is your plan for that, or what is your thinking in that regard?
Thanks for the question. So my thinking on it is this: the transformation fund is based on expiring funds, and if you look back at our track record, we actually have pretty consistently anywhere from 500 to $1 billion a year that expires. And so I think it's relatively consistent, but you bring up a good point. What's the right mix of base budget versus transformation fund? As you know, the transformation fund can also be used for physical infrastructure. And, we have as you know, sir, we have a great deficit there as well. So we're going to have to make, some smart decisions about how much we include in our base budget and how much we use for the transformation fund. 22 is the first year that we have access to the transformation fund. And my guess is that'll be very informative to us. And going forward, we're happy to be very transparent with our thought process in our budget request of what makes sense to include in base and what makes sense to include as part of the transformation fund.
Okay, well, can you give me some idea of what specifically will be funded from the transformational fund versus what will come from standard appropriations? And if you can't tell me that off the top of your head, you can just do that for the record. You can submit it.
I think probably better to take it for the record. We've had many discussions, and I can't say that I firmly in my mind have the right approach for definitively using the transformation fund only for these specific areas. So if you don't mind, I think I would take it for the record.
Okay, we'd appreciate that. I would like to move now to Mr. Parrish. Mr. Parrish, in your position as the Chief Acquisition Officer and your role overseeing the contracting workforce at VA, what is your current contribution to budget requests?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. As you know, Title 41 gives me the authorities as the Chief Acquisition Officer for all things acquisition management. And so one of the things we're trying to put in place in my role is working closely, as Mr. Quezada mentioned, in the IT Investment Board, where we do oversee all IT acquisitions and all IT budget requests and programs. We start with requirements analysis, going into the funding and then to the execution. So my firm belief is we'll get to the point where we'll be able to manage our cost, schedule, and performance, and we deliver what we promise, deliver on time, deliver on or under budget. So we work closely hand in glove with the CFO and the CIO to kind of review and approve the budgets.
Okay. From your current experience at VA, I'm talking about your current experience, what is your opinion of the current capacity of the acquisition management workforce from contracting officers to contracting officer representatives? What is your sense of the capacity?
So in my first few months here, I noticed we have a great plethora of strong professionals of, I believe it's 15,000 plus contracting officers, 1102s. I do appreciate some of the commentary and learnings I've gotten from the GAO findings. I know that we are on the high risk list, and I am driving towards ensuring that we have a acquisition career path and an acquisition workforce in place and strong and enforceable and enforced by the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, I'm going to yield back, Chairman Mervan. I've got more questions, but maybe we can do a second round. Thank you, Mr. Parrish, for your responses.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. The VA spends more than any other department in government outside of the DoD on information technology. Everything VA does is IT and acquisition go hand in hand. VA will never improve their success with these large-scale programs if they don't have better acquisition management controls. Mr. Davis, is IT acquisition handled in a centralized manner or at a local facility level? And if I can have the percentages for each.
I would ask that you allow me to get back for those numbers and provide those answers in a separate later on. Question for the record.
Ms. Harris, in your opinion, is the current structure within VA adequate to award and manage large IT modernization projects?
Thank you for the question. In looking at VA and how IT is managed throughout the department, it is a pretty highly decentralized operation. And that's something that contributes to the significant longstanding challenges with regard to IT management. We want to see more centralization occur in order to be able to effectively manage risks, both from a cyber perspective, but also from these major IT acquisitions. So that's certainly something that we have been keeping track of. As one example, when you take a look at IT contracts or IT category spending itself, just as an example, roughly a quarter or 1.5 billion of its IT category spend is comprised of unaligned IT spending, meaning spending on contracts that isn't aligned with enterprise or best-in-class contracts. And with IT category, we're talking about IT software, hardware, consulting, security. So common goods and services that can be shared across the enterprise. They aren't unique to particular major projects. And so having a more centralized approach to IT would allow VA to more effectively deploy IT as well as secure it, and then also create opportunities for cost savings as well.
As a follow-up, can you let me know of outstanding GAO recommendations that you have that would increase their ability to successfully award and manage these projects?
Certainly. So, when it comes to IT contracts, what's really critical is to have that close collaboration between the CFO, CAO, and the CIO. I'm pleased to hear that the three gentlemen are actively pursuing the investment board review process, and having it sounds like it is going to be a much closer collaboration than in years past. So we'll be we'll be following this very closely to ensure that this is implemented effectively. It will be it's going to need a long-standing, sustained commitment from VA, and so certainly that's something that we'll have to keep an eye out on. But I'm very pleased to hear that this is going to occur, because I do think that that will help mitigate some of the risks and issues that we've identified across the board over the last decade.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. Mr. Cassatt, to what extent does VA's decentralized IT structure hinder IT acquisition? And if I can ask if you could speak up, we're having a challenging time hearing on the VA witness side, respectfully.
Okay, I'll do my best to speak up a bit. Thanks for letting us know. No, I do agree with Ms. Harris's comments that, a centralized approach, enterprise approach is definitely the way to go. We are aiming to, use enterprise approaches wherever we can. We'd be happy to brief the subcommittee on some of our efforts against category management that we've spent the last couple of years implementing a category management approach within our strategic sourcing office. We do have centralized acquisition through our TAC, the Technology Acquisition Center, that we work in partnership with the Chief Acquisition Officer, Mr. Parrish. Everything that we do, we try and look and see if we can use an enterprise product or an enterprise portfolio. You heard the product lines mentioned by Mr. Davis. We are moving to a product line management approach, so we're not buying onesie twosie, and we are looking at things in terms of product lines and enterprise solutions. And I'll finish by saying, the centralization, it has been a long journey. We have VA used to be very decentralized. We had, I think, hundreds of CIOs all over the VA. In recent history, so over the past 7, 8, 9 years or so, we've been consolidating. I think we've gone a long way, and it really has helped. So I agree, we need to keep pulling those CIO authorities back together, meet the spirit and intent of FITARA, and really be operating like an enterprise and not a very federated environment.
Thank you, Mr. Cassatt. At this time, I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Mr. Rosendale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chalsky, the transformation fund reaches back 5 years in the past to repurpose unspent dollars. Where exactly are those unspent dollars coming from, and how much money do you expect that this will be available over the next 5 years?
They mostly come from, I would say, from contracts that were awarded that came in under cost. In some cases, money that was not obligated on contracts or fell out of contracts, or things like that. Predominantly from the Veterans Health Administration for a variety of reasons, and the amounts vary from, I would say, between 500 to $1 billion. It's been pretty consistent with the amount that expires annually.
So we're looking at somewhere then, if I'm understanding properly, over the next 5 years, we could be looking at anywhere from 2.5 billion to $5 billion that would be
that's true. That's true.
Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And these contracts are awarded. They're not specifically for other IT purposes. What are those contracts?
No, so what happens in the course of a fiscal year? We contract with organizations and they provide services. At the end of the year, not all of the services have been provided, or maybe will be provided, or there's a possibility a contract was protested, was never awarded, and so those funds will sit, for that 5-year period. And other contracts may have been awarded, but in the end, they may come in at a lower cost than was originally projected. So money will come off of that contract, and that all sort of accumulates to that 500 million to $1 billion, which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot of money. There's no question. I mean, it's mind blowing. But when you look at it in
Montana terms, I assure you.
Yeah, I'm with you, buddy. But what I would say is, based on the size of our organization and our budget, on a percentage basis, it's pretty low. And for the organizations that I've worked for, DoD, for example, it's true there too. I mean, and in some ways, it's better to do that than be irresponsible with it and put it on a contract or something like that you don't need. So it's just sort of the way it is. And so that money in the past had expired, gone back to the Treasury. But the appropriators, or Congress, frankly, very wisely said, hey, you could probably use that money, put it to good use for IT and for infrastructure, which we absolutely can. So it was, in my estimation, a smart move, very much appreciated, and it's going to go to good use, I think.
So, Mr. Cassatt, doesn't this create an incentive to divert more funding from healthcare, which is not only dangerous, but in violation of VA's mission?
There's always a danger, but like I said, we sort of manage the demand very closely and carefully. And I know VHA has more demand than budget as we do. So I'm sure they're very good stewards of the funds that they have. So we'll watch that carefully.
So, but it's very concerning to me that these funds that were dedicated or earmarked to be utilized for the delivery of healthcare purposes, okay, and now are being diverted out because they've been held over, and they go into a fund that gives you dramatic latitude of where it can be spent. And so, as a former state legislator watching this practice take place, it gives you as the department much more say about where those dollars are being spent, instead of Congress, who appropriated those dollars and designated them for specific areas. So how is this not incentivizing the department to shade funds away from those areas which Congress had identified and dedicated them for?
I could take that question, Congressman. It's not that the funds are being shaded or directed. It's just the natural course of business. When we award a contract, we estimate what that contract's going to cost. And not all of this is for medical care. It could be for anything, for management services, for many things across the VA. So it's not just in VHA. But the most typical scenario is a contract is awarded for something, and let's say it's for management services, and there are optional, there are CLINs associated with that, or services to be purchased. And at the end of the contract, sometimes it didn't cost as much as we thought it was going to cost. We didn't exercise all of the services, decided we didn't need some. And so the money that was on that contract eventually falls out of the contract and goes into this pool of money. A lot of it just has to do with it didn't cost as much as we thought it was going to. So we received the services, but it was not at the same level that we thought it was going to be. And so that money tends to accumulate. There would be no incentive. In fact, there's sort of a natural disincentive for that to happen, because the people that are awarding the contracts for whether it's medical care services, they're going to do what they need to do to accomplish their mission. And just in the natural course of business, if it comes in at a lower cost, the money's going to fall out of the contract and it's going to go sit in this pool for 5 years until it's going to expire. And the new authority we have is then to use those expiring funds. So I just want to reinforce that there's no incentive for someone to not use the money and to put it into this fund for 5 more years. And there's also I think, as I said before, sort of the natural course of business where money falls off of contracts for a variety of reasons. But basically, a lot of it has to do with just came in less than we thought it was going to.
Mr. Chair, I see that the time has expired. I would certainly yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Rosendale. At this time, I recognize Chairman Takano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Murvan. I want to now move to Ms. Harris. Ms. Harris, is it correct that the creation of the Chief Acquisition Officer position at VA was based off of a recommendation from your agency, GAO? I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Ms. Harris. You might want to unmute your.
Here we go. Okay.
There you are.
So our just to clarify that the recommendation related to that from GAO is related to ensuring a non-career employee was in place as required by law, non-acting civil servant as they had for years. So it wasn't necessarily the creation of the CIO position, but who is filling that position itself. So the non-career employee, because that's what the law called for.
But it had to be an appointee.
That is correct. Yes.
And the Chief Acquisition Officer is an appointed position. It's not a career civil service position. But the recommendation was that it was a non-career position, had to be a political appointee.
That is correct, because the law called for that.
In your opinion, is VA making the most of this position, the CAO position? Specifically, what I'm getting at is, do you believe that VA has done enough to incorporate the CAO into the acquisition review and budget making process?
That's a great question. I think it's too soon to say for sure. When we did a review back in 2018, we saw that the CAO was not involved at all in the process of identifying IT acquisitions, and that was a major problem. And actually, similarly, the CIO was not involved in approving the IT budget requests or reviewing and approving IT contracts. And so we made recommendations for both of these officials to work together to review and approve all IT acquisition strategies and plans. And so we made recommendations related to this, and they still remain open. But given the statements made by the CAO, CFO, and CAO with regards to this investment review board process, we're going to have to take a look at this carefully, because I think that if it is implemented effectively, that's a very good sign for ensuring that the IT dollars are effectively spent. And that these projects are receiving the appropriate attention that they need. So we're going to have to keep a close eye on that. That will be a long, sustained effort that will be required on VA's part to be able to do well. But I am very encouraged by hearing this approach.
So I hear you saying basically it's a little too early to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're wondering here, at the oversight level, whether this is a situation where the committee needs to introduce legislation to codify the CAO's role in acquisition and budgeting at VA. What is your response to whether Congress should actually codify this role?
Well, sir, if you don't mind, I might I'm going to have to take that for the record. I'm not exactly the best expert within GAO to answer that question. We have experts that have been working very closely with Mr. Parrish as it relates to the GAO high risk designation of the GAO acquisition management area. I think that to the depending on how well VA implements the actions associated with that area, could inform the codification of the CIO that you're referring to.
Very well. Thank you. Thank you. We'll take that. We'll allow you to put that, bring it back to the record. Sir Cassatt, there's a real, we both know that there's a challenge in hiring qualified technical staff, and it's long been a struggle at VA, especially in locations such as Seattle or Silicon Valley, where technical experts can make considerably more outside of VA. Is staffing sufficient within OIT to meet VA's needs nationwide?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, workforce is so important, and it's a key element of our digital transformation strategy. So we do have plans. I think we're bringing on an additional 500 IT staff this year, and then we have subsequent plans for additional 500 next year and so on. We can only hire so fast, so we feel we have a good measured way to bring people on board. You're right, it is a challenge attracting people to come to the government writ large, not just VA, because the salaries are just exorbitant now. We have had some success in implementing cyber specialty pay retention, and that has helped us a lot for the cybersecurity staff. Yeah, we do need more IT staff to keep up with the pace that the VA has grown and the VA staff writ large, and we do have a plan to get, I think, about 1,500 or so more folks on board. And as was mentioned earlier, we're trying to keep that COVID surge staff on board, make them take them from temporary to permanent.
That's very good. If it's, I mean, my time is up, but I'd like to maybe if you could provide the committee with maybe a geographic analysis of this challenge, headquarters versus field offices, and the types of positions that if there's any patterns there that might emerge. I yield back, Mr. Mervan.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. At this time, I recognize myself for 5 minutes. And Mr. Cassatt, if you could also, to add to what Chairman Takano, if you could include that plan, if we could take a look at that plan that you mentioned to our staff, we'd appreciate it. Earlier in a testimony, you had talked about rating certain funds in order to pay other things off. Can you give me more of an elaboration on that and explain how that works and why that is a form of accounting? Right.
So as you know, every new business and mission requirement of the VA has an IT underpinning. There's very little you can do these days from a mission and business perspective that doesn't need IT support. So sometimes when there's a new legislation or a new requirement levied on the VA, since the IT appropriation is separate, the dollars don't always come into the IT appropriation commensurate with the IT support needed for the new capability. So what we'll have to do is rebalance. We have to look at our books and look at the budget and reprioritize and take money from less prioritized programs or modernization efforts to fund the new effort. So that's what we mean by it's kind of a crude term, rating the coffers, but it's really this rebalancing and reprioritization to get the funds that we need for the reality of the IT to support that mission and business effort.
To what extent does the VA frequent turnover in its CIO role hinder the strategic acquisition?
That's a great question, and we do try to mitigate that with a strong career leadership staff. We do have a principal deputy who's a career employee, as well as 6 deputy CIOs and deputy assistant secretaries who are careerists. So we really see that as the supplement to the rotating CIO who is a political appointee. Understand the benefits of that. You get an infusion of perhaps private sector viewpoints in bringing a political appointee in. But we balance it through the career staff and the career leadership that we have in place to mitigate the disruption.
And then, do you have a current estimate of how many shadow IT programs are not reflected in this current information technology budget?
I'd have to get back to you with some numbers of what we know. As you know, shadow IT, there's a lot of unknown unknowns out there, and sometimes you stumble onto things. So we can certainly give you a representation of what we have discovered. We're always seeking more of them, but we can get back to you with some numbers on that.
I appreciate that. Mr. Rachalski, there seems to be a number of decision makers regarding IT procurements, especially where those procurements will require interaction with new enterprise systems such as EHRM. Can you please walk the committee through the coordination between OEHRM and VHA and the OIT regarding the procurement?
Yeah, I can. As you know, I think it's legislated that the deputy secretary position is primarily responsible for the EHRM funding. And so that person, he or she, is primarily responsible for oversight. And we're working more of these issues through the IT Investment Board because they obviously have, cross-program effects into IT, into VHA infrastructure. So typically what will happen is if EHRM has an issue, or even IT or VHA, and it's in that realm, we take it to the board. And I think, as we described, Mr. Cusat and Mr. Parrish are the co-chairs. So we have a pretty good sense across the organization from a finance, IT, acquisition standpoint what's going on, and we consider them in that venue. And we have a broader audience there as well. So if there are residual impacts on other parts of the organization, we all, I think, have a better sight picture of how it's going on. So the net is we're running those through the IT Investment Board now, but ultimately the Deputy Secretary is responsible for oversight in the final decision making.
My goal is to determine whether the current management structure at VA is effectively coordinating to ensure that we are entering into agreements with the highest degree of confidence for success. I'm happy to have you take this for the record and provide any briefing to my staff if you'd like to conclude on that.
Sure. I would just make one comment about it. It is improving. What I would say, the IT Investment Board, which was not only born out, I think, of the GAO recommendation, but just out of necessity for the reasons we were describing. I mean, we were chasing our tail with new requirements that had ever increasing IT costs, and we hadn't properly accounted for those and asked for them for the resources when we needed it. And so the IT Investment Board has, I think, done a lot to bring us together and to focus and make us much more disciplined. But we're not where we need to be yet. There's no question about that.
Thank you, sir. At this time, I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Mr. Rosendale for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Davis, beyond the 3 items that you propose to spend the transformation fund dollars on next year, what other items do you consider fair game or potential recipients for those funds?
Yeah, thank you, sir. As we have spoken earlier, by the ARP funds, by the transformation funds and some of the criteria around that, any kind of infrastructure, that's not only infrastructure when it says the activity, but also activations as far as infrastructure with VHA. So we sort of have a if you want to call it, a fence around what we can use it for. But right now we're looking at some of the things and benefits. We had a meeting this morning, we discussed those things. So there's a few other areas we're looking at, but as we figure out how much money we actually have in the transformation fund, we will look at some of those areas, but mainly in the benefits area with the GIBL and some of those things in education.
Okay, Mr. Cusat, OIT's budget request will be supplemented by $670 million from the new transformation fund. It seems you're depending on this fund to balance your budget. What would happen if your budget and your operations, if those resources weren't available or to decrease dramatically?
Yeah, great question. And, as I mentioned earlier, we're in a constant, sort of prioritization effort whenever, when we're looking at funds and funding that we have and where our cut line is for funded requirements versus unfunded requirements, we look at that through the course of the entire year. If we were to take a hit on the order of $600 million to what we expected to get for this year, we'd really have to look hard at that priority list. Our sustainment budget, things just to keep the lights on, we don't have a lot of discretion there. We have to keep that infrastructure running. So unfortunately, where that will hit a lot is in new projects or development projects. We can look at some of the sustainment budget and say, hey, are these nice to have or need to have? But it's a constant exercise in looking at what budget we have available, what the priorities are, and that's where that relationship between the CAO, the CFO, the CIO, and the administrations is critical, because we don't want to make those decisions on our own. We want to talk to the mission and business and say, where can you stand to take some cuts in IT support? We don't want to make those decisions on our own. So like the CFO said, we've come a long way, and it's much better than it was in terms of that partnership and making those decisions together. But we have a little ways to go, but we're getting there. We're making progress.
Sure. So still the $670 million is not an insignificant number. And so as all of us do, it boils down to the wants and needs. Do you see that if that $670 million is to go away, that you're actually going to be cutting into the needs, not just the wants?
It's hard to say. We'd really have to sit and look down, but it's hard to imagine it wouldn't. The IT budget will be what it will be, and we have to operate within it. So, but again, that prioritization process makes sure. Certainly, we look at the needs, but when we look at certainly we can look at the wants. But when we're looking at the needs, we're cutting in places that hurt the least and cause the least impact to the veterans, because in the end, that's what it's all about. We try to pull that thread back to, okay, how is this going to land on the veterans and hit the veterans? So sure, that partnership allows us to do that.
I'd just make one, put a finer point on it. We couldn't take a hit of $670 million without cutting into the bone, so to speak. But I would also say in the transformation fund, if you look historically back many years, the amount that expires every year, again, is between 500 and $1 billion, closer probably to $1,700,000,000 a year. So it's actually a pretty steady source of funding, but we could not do without the $670 million. I mean, that would be really it would cut very deep.
Okay, so that brings me to my point. How is it then that you can say that you're not incentivized to direct critical funds from VHA to fund the transformation fund?
I can say it just by nature of how the funds end up in the transformation fund. Our overall budget is distributed across the VA for various programs, and they work those programs, they execute those funds in support of the programs, and when they're done, whatever wasn't spent ends up in the expiring fund. So there's no guidance or any initiative to tell people, don't spend this money on homeless, don't spend it on medical care, because we want to set that money aside for 5 years and then put it into IT. It just, we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot to do that. So the program executes as it normally does. Whatever falls out into the expiring funds. We now have access to the transformation fund, and it just turns out that historically it's in the $500 million to $1 billion a year. For many years, it's been that amount.
Mr. Chair, my time has expired. I would yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. At this time, we recognize Chair Takano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Mervan. Mr. Casado, I'd like to continue with a line of questioning about vacancies. Can you just tell me how many vacancies you currently have? Do you have a handle on that number?
We do have that number. I'll have to take that for the record and get you the exact number. It's constantly changing, so. Okay.
Is there anything that Congress can do to help you to fill these positions? As far as, do you need anything from Congress that would make filling these positions easier?
You know, our direct hire authority has helped immensely. So protecting that and, you know, making sure we always have something similar available to us that helps us, because a lot of times the hiring process takes a length of time that folks get other offers and then they don't take the offer. So that will help it. And things like the cyber incentive pay helps us having latitude to do things like that. Finally, I'll say, you know, I just want to mention, we've seen with COVID the success of a remote workforce. So we're seeing a lot of opportunity there that we can attract folks from different parts of the nation. We don't have to look at just certain hubs to have people report to work. I think having a bigger remote workforce is really going to help us get and retain talent. Are
you saying, Mr. Cassatt, that we could probably hire more people in places like Montana and Indiana?
Or my home state of Pennsylvania. So yes, absolutely.
I know lots of people who probably prefer the lifestyle in Montana to be able to work, but we need to make sure they get broadband out there. That's the thing, right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, Mr. Cassatt, given the difficulty the VA has had with hiring qualified federal employees for these technical positions, it is commonplace across government to supplement the government workforce with contractor staff. While I'm supportive of hiring subject matter experts in the IT field to manage these large programs, I'm concerned that we may be too heavily reliant on contractors to do the work that federal employers should be doing. It's important that we are investing in our workforce and keeping the institutional knowledge and expertise within VA. So to what extent is VA dependent on contractors outside of the large IT modernization acquisitions?
Yeah, we definitely are reliant, and I believe it has to be a good balance, right? You know, we need to balance our government staff with our contractor staff. IT is constantly changing. We don't often always have the IT expertise we need in-house to keep up with the changes. So contracting allows us to be able to reach out to those skills and get them on board quickly. So we have some time to upskill our people or retrain our people or redefine job categories to meet those needs. So it's good to have a balance, and we do have a lot of options for bringing folks on.
Well, specifically, are you aware of the size of your support contractor workforce in OIT?
Yes. Yeah, we do know what the size is and what the budget is.
Okay. Can you provide a comparison of how many support contractors are in OIT, you know, kind of on a percentage basis versus federal employees?
Yes, sir, I can. I can take that for the record and get that back to you.
Okay. So, I mean, that's a real important thing for us to drill down on. But, you know, not in my district, but next door to me is Dr. Ruiz, who has the city of Palm Springs, and property values have been shooting up through the roof. One theory is that we have a lot of Silicon Valley folks that are going to be able to work remotely for, into the future. And so I was only half kidding with the idea that many parts of our country that are less populated and have, you know, nice amenities and lifestyle amenities, that tech workers, especially in the IT field, the opportunity is for us to be able to, hire folks on a real, and have them work on a remote basis. So, but we need broadband. We need broadband in some of these remote areas. That would be an interesting thing for us to do. All right, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Rachalski. On May 25th, the VA Office of the Inspector General released a report about the physical infrastructure costs on electronic health record modernization program. In that report, the IG states that the OEHRM officials stated that the physical infrastructure upgrades were the responsibility of VHA, and that the OEHRM stated that it did not disclose these to Congress as part of the program's reported cost estimates. I understand that these physical infrastructure upgrades were needed regardless of the EHRM project. However, is it safe to say that they were accelerated by EHRM?
Yes, that is absolutely fair to say.
Were IT infrastructure upgrades deemed the responsibility of the OIT?
They were deemed, for the initial rollout, they were deemed the responsibility of EHRM.
If the VA is making a VHA and an OIT responsible for the infrastructure upgrades, how is VA supplementing their budgets to ensure sufficient funds are allocated?
Well, the IT infrastructure for the initial rollout was included in the EHRM budget request. That was fully funded. And then for the physical infrastructure, it was included in our physical infrastructure request, probably in the non-recurring maintenance line.
If there is risk that the EHRM becomes a proverbial 1,000-pound gorilla that absorbs all of the resources and other needs get left unmet?
I mean, anything is possible. I'm frankly not seeing evidence of that yet. You know, I was in DoD when we rolled out the same system to the initial sites in Spokane, Washington. I share your observation, your concern, but I will just tell you candidly, I'm not seeing that yet. And in going forward, I'm also not seeing that. I think that the projections that we have, or at least we're executing sort of towards them. So, and I would be absolutely candid with you if I thought it's going to run off the rails, but I'm just not seeing it yet.
Okay. We on this committee expect full accounting, and I think we owe a full and transparent accounting to the American taxpayer. That being said, if the physical infrastructure upgrades are being funded by VHA and the IT upgrades are being funded by the OIT, how do you plan to conduct a full accounting of the EHRM program?
But we do have in our accounting system, we're keeping track of all of this so we can absolutely provide the individual cost elements that make it up. I'm confident of that. From an accounting standpoint, we can provide the complete costs.
Okay. Yesterday, Secretary McDonough sent a letter to the House Appropriators. In that letter, the Secretary signaled a change in the way the infrastructure is being evaluated for EHRM. If I'm understanding this correctly, the plan is to conduct an enterprise-wide current state review of physical and IT infrastructure. Is that an accurate assessment?
It is. Yes, that is correct.
Given that physical infrastructure is being funded out of VHA and NRM budget, and the IT infrastructure is being funded by OIT, I'm concerned that this change in process is not supported by this budget request.
Yeah, that's possible. And those are some of the details we're sorting through right now, but that is possible.
And how does VA plan to support an enterprise-wide current state review and fund the infrastructure upgrades identified with the requested budget?
I would like to take that for the record because we're still sorting through some of these. And without going into details, in some cases, I'm not seeing necessarily a cost increase or need for any additional resources, certainly in 21. Potentially for 22, sort of depends. But if I could take that for the record, and as we're sorting through some of these details, we will be absolutely transparent. And I'm happy to share with you as soon as we know something definitively that I can really stand behind.
Okay. With that, I yield back Mr. Rosendale. I now recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to wrap up and just hit you with one more question. Mr. Cassatt and Mr. Rachalski, I want to thank you guys for coming in and participating in the hearing today and fielding all these questions. Your budget is, however, too important to gloss over. And I think that the time constraints of this hearing are basically giving us some limitations on what we can actually dig into from a detailed point of view. For that reason, I'd like our staffs to get together with your staff, okay, as soon as possible and do a deep dive on IT budgetary issues that we were not able to cover here today. Can I count on you to help facilitate that?
Absolutely. At your convenience. We're happy to meet with them.
Thank you. Thank you. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would yield the balance of my time back.
I now recognize Chairman Takano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Mervan. I too want to thank the witnesses, and Chairman Mervan, I don't have any more questions. And it's been a very, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to probe in depth. I appreciate the questions from the minority. I thought they were very, very much in the spirit of accountability and the oversight our role. And I, appreciate your leadership, Chairman Mervan. This is a very dry topic, IT, but it's incredibly important. And it can get beyond us pretty quickly in terms of if we don't manage it well and oversee it well. So I appreciate the witnesses today and everyone from the VA and the GAO. Now yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. I now recognize himself for 5 more minutes. Mr. Rachelsky, among 19 major agencies and departments, VA ranks 5th lowest in the cybersecurity funding, despite spending the most in real dollars and percentages of budget of any department except the DoD. VA holds a large amount of person health information, PHI. How can you explain this disparity? Mr. Olszewski, you are muted at this point. Still muted.
You hear me now?
We're good to go. Yes, sir.
All right. So I'm going to refer the question to Mr. Cusat, who knows cybersecurity obviously far better than I do. But one observation I would make is I don't know that the measurement of a gross spend or spend compared to other agencies is really a measure of effectiveness. Through my career, I can point to many programs that had ample funding but did not spend it wisely to detrimental effects. And so I think that it is a measure. I don't know if it's a good measure, but Mr. Cusat, maybe you can help me with cybersecurity.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. And we appreciate your interest in cybersecurity because it is so important at the VA. If you look at the 2 charts that you presented at the beginning, I just wanted to point out for the record, the first chart is just raw dollars. Second chart was percentage of cybersecurity spend against the discretionary budget. If you composed the first chart and looked at percent of IT spend against discretionary dollars, you'd see it kind of in a similar ballpark as the cybersecurity spend in terms of relation to other agencies. So, I'd say the cyber spend that you're seeing on that chart is in line with our IT budget against discretionary spend. And our IT budget did go up this year. We requested more, and about 10% of our IT budget goes to cybersecurity. Is it enough? Could we use more for cyber? Absolutely. We could do more if we had more, but we do the best with what we can to balance the cyber needs with the IT needs writ large. And it's all about risk management and risk assessment. So we have a risk management framework in place, a risk management process, and we know what are the most critical vulnerabilities. We know we have threat intelligence and we understand what's hitting our networks. So we do try and array those funds against the highest criticality things that we're going to get the most bang for our buck for those funds. We're very mindful of that as we go forward. So, hopefully as we would see that, IT funding increase, as it has over the past few years, we see the cyber funding increase along with it.
Mr. Mervan, we can't hear you.
Yes. Is the current funding request adequate to protect the country's 2nd largest cabinet department?
We believe we have adequate risk-based measures in place to address the most pressing areas. Again, if we had more, we could do more. But we believe we have a threat-based and risk-based approach to focus our funding on the most pressing priority areas. And we have a very close partnership with the likes of DHS and CISA and the Committee on National Security Systems and the intel agencies to help make sure our cyber defenses are relevant and on point as much as possible.
How have the recent impacts of ransomware attacks changed your perception or the need for increased cybersecurity spending for VA IT systems?
Ransomware attacks have increased our interest in having good COOP and backup systems in place to make sure that the data, if it is subject to ransomware, we have good backups. It also has shored up our assertion that dual factor authentication and strong authentication is very important. And VA has done very well in that regard over the past 4 or 5 years, going from single digit two-factor authentication up to the high 90% area, single digit percent of two-factor to high 90% two-factor authentication. That has really saved us in terms of controlling the spread of malware attacks and things like ransomware. Our detection mechanisms and our two-factor authentication and strong authentication keeps them from moving laterally through our networks, our adversaries, so to speak. So ransomware has heightened our interest and our perseverance in certain areas like backup and authentication and insider threat training, which we've also stepped up in the past several years.
Ms. Harris, if I could, do you feel that the current funding request from VA for cybersecurity is adequate to address their issues with securing veterans' personal health information and protecting critical IT programs?
Sir, to be honest, I'm not quite sure. As Mr. Cassatt said, VA does have a cybersecurity risk management program. However, it is not complete. And as he said, it's important that agencies have this because they need to be able to effectively identify, prioritize, and manage these cyber risks. VA has established the role of a cybersecurity risk executive, for example, to lead VA's activities in this area, but it has not developed a cyber risk management strategy, nor performed department-wide risk assessments or established coordination between their cybersecurity and enterprise risk management programs for managing these risks. So there are still critical areas that they need to address in this regard. In addition, our work on VA's high impact systems. So these are systems that where a breach could have catastrophic impact on VA's operations. And back in 2016, we identified control deficiencies related to access controls, patch management, and contingency planning. We made 74 recommendations. 70 of them have been implemented thus far, but there are still 4 outstanding recommendations that need to be addressed to remedy these deficiencies. They're related to access controls and configuration management. So that's also something that is of concern. And lastly, I'll mention the IT supply chain. In light of the SolarWinds attack, we issued a report back in December looking at the 23 civilian CFO agencies relative to how they are managing their supply chain risks. There are 7 foundational practices for such an effort, including developing procedures for assessing potential suppliers and detecting counterfeit and compromised products prior to their deployment. Few agencies, including VA, had implemented these 7 foundational practices. So there is still quite a bit of work on the cybersecurity front that needs to take place. And so ensuring that that VA has the resources to address these significant issues that I just identified is critical.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harris. I have one more question for Mr. Cassatt. Given recent cyber attacks and ransomware, especially those perpetuated by foreign actors or groups with foreign ties, securing government assets is more important than ever. However, despite recent events, VA cybersecurity spending continues to decline in both real dollars and percentage discretionary funds between fiscal year 2021 and fiscal year 2022. How would you evaluate the cyber threats facing VA would you say they have increased or decreased?
Thank you for the question. I would say certainly maybe cyber threats are evolving, but I guess pound for pound, certainly they're increasing because the sophistication is increasing. We'll have to look at the numbers you're providing here. Our cybersecurity funding did increase this year. And one of the things you might be looking at is some of our cybersecurity spend is now embedded in operations. We've done a lot over the past 2 or 3 years to embed cybersecurity operations into our sustainment environment and our IT operations environment. So that's a good thing. We're baking security in rather than brushing it on at the end. So we can do a little more to kind of get you some visibility into the cybersecurity related or information security related spend that's happening in our sustainment environment, which wouldn't be evident in our OIS budget, which is strictly cybersecurity. But the bottom line is we are continuing to invest in cyber. We are seeing our cyber dollars go up, and again, if we had more dollars, we certainly would invest even more in cyber if we could.
And just as a follow-up, as a CIO, how can VA justify a 2022 budget request where information security is the lowest by both percentages and discretionary funding and the percentage of the IT funding over the last 5 years?
Again, I'd have to look at the numbers and to see how that tracks with the actual investments, if you include investments in operations. Again, I would suggest that that's a good thing, embedding cybersecurity spend in your sustainment. But we actually have seen increase in cybersecurity spend across the last few years and investment. And I'll ask if Mr. Davis has anything to add on that, but I might have covered it.
And I do believe those numbers included operations.
Yes, sir. We'll have to go back and check on those numbers because by our indications and everything, we have had a slight increase. I think almost a $19 million increase from this past year to this year. So we'll go back and take a look at your numbers, and we'll also take a look and provide a response to that.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to recognize the Ranking Member Rosendale for closing comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. I appreciate your leadership in calling this hearing to order. I think Congress and VA would benefit if each of our subcommittees would examine their respective areas of budget in this way. With the amount of money under consideration and the impact that the VA healthcare and benefits have on veterans' lives, the budget demands more attention. As I've said previously, committee hearings are not the most flexible format to have that discussion. And I think it would be helpful if our staffs continued this budgetary conversation with the VA. I'd like to reiterate the request for a staff level deep dive into the IT budget. And I appreciate the assurances that we're going to be able to make that happen. As important as it is to get the numbers right, it's clear to me that the format and contents of the budget can be improved. Mr. Chairman, my legislation, which you have supported, the VA IT Reform Act, would do just that. As the bill advances, I think we should take every opportunity to communicate our expectations for the budget process and better understand what OIT's needs are. Thank you again for holding this hearing. And with that, I would yield back and wish everyone a happy weekend and holiday weekend.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale, and happy weekend to you also. I would like to thank the witnesses for the participation today. I think we need to continue to discuss how VA budgets for its investments in IT and cybersecurity. Given our limited ability to go into depth in a hearing setting, I would like to continue with comprehensive staff level discussions, just as the ranking member had mentioned, about the budget information VA provides about its IT programs. I hope this underscores how important I believe that the department's technology modernization efforts are, and the department's continued progress in program management and acquisition, as well as a deeper commitment to cybersecurity. I look forward to continuing this conversation. I hope that we begin to see some real progress in VA's efforts to address these longstanding problems. And I just want to conclude by saying I appreciate your service. I appreciate Ms. Harris. Thank you for joining us, and the VA representatives. And may we always remember that we're protecting that veterans' healthcare, quality healthcare, and also the process when we talk about cybersecurity that could potentially lock up all systems and prevent healthcare to our veterans. So going forward, if we can work in a collaborative effort to make sure that that will not happen, I look forward to working hand in hand with you in that regard. With that, I want to wish everyone a very happy Independence Day, and I thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And all members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material